Hey, what's up, everybody? So I have Justin Mitchell here. Mitch is in the picture and the title, but he's not with us today. Couldn't make it. Looks like he had a baby
little
yesterday or
baby
today, I
girl.
think. Yeah. So congrats, Mitch.
Congrats,
Uh,
Mitch.
so I guess we'll just chat with Justin, and I'm gonna expand upon my video that I put out on Django interview questions. So I did a video on that. It's always hard to cover every topic. So what I'm gonna do is try to get everything I missed and bring somebody on that's an absolute Django expert, somebody that knows more technical information than me because I'm not really well versed in that. I can get stuff done. I know what I'm doing, but sometimes I may struggle there. So somebody that can help clear that up, answer more questions, and then also make sure that you guys are sending in questions. So I put out a post on interview questions that you guys might have experienced. So go ahead and send those in. Maybe we can elaborate on that, ask some questions. We'll try to go Q&A, but yeah, we'll just go into that. So right now I'm still going through those questions right now, and I'm just pulling those up and pasting them into a file here so we can go into those.
Sounds good.
And
Well, thanks for having me, Dennis. I just wanted to say one thing. I haven't been interviewed that much. I've definitely interviewed or hired freelance developers quite a bit, but I think I have some insights on these things just from not starting out as a technical person in companies and then moving into being a lot more technical. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing what these questions are and how I might be able to give some input.
So when you did the interview thing, or when you went through your process of hiring help or freelancers, what would you look for? Because you probably had like a specific task you were trying to accomplish. You probably didn't go through like that typical process, right? Like, what is Django? Explain this to me. You were more of just seeing what they were about and giving them a task, or
Yeah, so I would explain the project and see what their ideas are for accomplishing it technically, right? Not just speaking about it, but like, oh, for example, like, oh, I need a new REST API endpoint. How do I do this? Right?
okay,
Like, right? And I could say, then I would assume they would ask how I'm doing it now, right? So there's a lot of things built into that where it's kind of open ended. Usually with freelancers, though, I'm specifically looking for a Django developer or a React developer. Like I'm a lot more specific for it because as a freelancer, you're probably being hired for one project, maybe many projects down the line, but one project is a lot lower stakes than I'm hiring you for a few years to work full time. So it's quite a bit different of an equation.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, exactly. You're hunting that down too, or you're going, specific here, and you trying to accomplish one thing. Yeah. One thing about the process itself, it's funny because I said Django interview. It's definitely like it's only one aspect of the interview process itself. Like the technical part is such a small part of it. Like you're going through way different assessments of past projects, and that's where more of the judgment came in. That's one of the things that I try to mention there was that you're going to be assessed by your past projects and just a conversation more than you will in how you answer the questions. So let me go through my questions here. So we covered things like in the original one, it was obviously like the prerequisites, right? So like HTML and CSS skills, those are going to be a must. Well, I would usually start at that point. I like to know that people had some JavaScript experience. So like the example was for a beginner level Django developer or somebody that's going to be a junior developer. I'm trying to figure out the official term here. So usually I kind of went through the prerequisites and then I would go into Django itself. And a few things that I missed was topics like authentication and in that video, sessions and stuff like that. So that's what people were sending in. They were basically saying that they were asked a lot of questions about those topics. But I feel like I covered most of the basics here. Like the idea was to make sure that this person that I'm hiring can actually come into the company and actually be a developer, maybe not on day one, but maybe after spending a couple of days understanding the system. So let me try to pull up a few here. So here's one. Somebody says, questions I had for a junior role. What was the majority or what was the major difficulty you've had using Django? So that person's probably like going through trying to figure out what if you've actually built out projects in Django, if you have some experience there. So Justin, I want to jump into class-based views actually right now, because that's a topic I also addressed in a different video. There's a lot of fights there. It's kind of funny to me. Like I love poking the bear in that conversation because I really hate the one side or the other.
Yeah.
Can you clarify that a little bit? Because that's That's it's always an interesting one. Like I know your take on it, but I just want to maybe
Like what are class-based views?
no, not what are class-based views, but somebody actually in this interview process basically said that that was like the biggest part. Like they had to understand them very well, and that was like what you have to use as somebody that's more experienced.
Yeah, I think if you're developing professionally and you're working in a team, you absolutely need to understand and master class-based views. And if you are asked about them and you don't know about them, as a junior, I think that's probably generally okay. Although I wouldn't expect you to be getting very many offers not knowing class-based views. Since views are a fundamental aspect of Django, to say that you're spending a lot of time just on function-based views means that you're missing this whole other piece of Django that's built in and also used by other very popular frameworks like the Django REST framework.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like you, especially if you're going into an environment where you're going to be working with it, you do have to know it. But at the end of the day, you would say that both will accomplish the same task, right? Maybe one has strengths and weaknesses to it. Like let's say you might be a little bit limited as far as like what you can do maybe with a function-based view, but you can still accomplish the task.
Yeah, you can still accomplish the task, absolutely. But one of the questions I would come back at somebody if I'm like, if I ask them, what do you think about class-based views versus function-based views? Which one do you prefer, and explain why? And if they tell me function-based views, I would then ask them about dry. Can you explain dry to me? That is a question that should come up in every. I mean, if it's not coming up, it should come up naturally in your own speech of what dry is or staying dry when you're writing software. And if you can't explain staying dry and class-based views, then you don't understand the concept, at least from my vantage. So it'd be a big red flag if you can't explain dry, absolutely. But then even more so as justification between dry and class-based views, like what's your justification for using just function-based views in order to stay dry? So
yeah, I think the fact that you said dry was perfect. For those of you guys that don't understand that, that's probably the best answer by far. Don't repeat yourself. Like that's encoding. That's like the one rule where somebody used the analogy where in business it's location, location, location. In programming, it's reuse. And that's kind of the best answer I can ever hear, or that I'll probably hear on that topic is you're trying to reuse a lot of code. But yeah, I would say, yeah, that's solid. So I actually found the questions, or somebody actually like listed out 28 questions that they actually, oh no, it was 8. So they listed out 8 questions that they were asked in an interview. So I want to go into those. And I think I addressed some of these. And this is one I actually missed. So error handling and exceptions. So this is something that like they were probably being asked, what do these mean? Like what's I get these, I'm sure you get these in emails all the time or in the comment section. Hey, I have a template does not exist error. I'm kind of surprised when I get that, but I guess maybe I should address that in my videos. When you're seeing these errors, I probably should have like a section in like my next course or a tutorial series on what all of these mean, and obviously looking into the documentation. So template doesn't exist, object doesn't exist. How do you raise your own 404 errors? So this is from Saying D. He commented on the video, and that was the first one. Then he says number 2, and he's saying these are patterns that he noticed because he's probably done a few interviews. File operations, mainly uploading files, reading and parsing. That seems like a very specific thing. I can see that for like static file storage, maybe like if you're asking where you're storing them, if you're putting them on S3, stuff like that. So maybe that's what he's referring to.
Oh, I would absolutely want to know if I'm hiring someone to work as a junior Django developer. I would absolutely want to hear their thoughts on how do you handle file uploads and how do you handle static files, like, and hear their thought process on that, because like many things in programming, there's many ways to skin a cat. So you can do it in many different ways, and many different ways are correct, both technically and also efficiency wise. But I would want to hear that thought process on how they actually handle those two features. And then as far as exceptions are concerned, if you're getting a template does not exist, I think there's another question that would come right after that is, how do you write unit tests? Like, how do you actually test your code? Because if you're getting a template not exists error in production, even in development, where's the test for it? Why isn't there a unit test written?
So that's funny. That's actually the next one was Django test or even unit test in Python.
Yeah.
I'll admit it right now. Big area that I'm weak in.
Yeah.
Like that's something that I do not do. So I really need to get into that and spend some time there.
Well, so there's a concept called test-driven development. So if you don't write unit tests, you would be like, oh, well, tell me about TDD. And again, another red flag. If you don't understand what that acronym is, which stands for test-driven development, it's another red flag of like, oh, you're definitely still trying to figure things out, which is fine. And I think that's important to be upfront about. Like if someone says TDD and you're like, oh, it's definitely testing development while driving or some you make up some meaning for it and you're like very confident in it, that's also another big red flag. Like you're going to be like, oh, well, yeah, you're incorrect on that. I think it's okay to qualify if you don't know something, because the interviewer is not going to hit you up and be like, here are the things you got wrong. Here are the things you need to improve on. They're just going to move on because they're going through so many people. They're just going to politely decline you from going on there. So it's better to be in the interview and be like, you don't understand TDD or dry. You don't understand what those acronyms are. Ask. That's how you're going to actually improve a lot. And if you really don't know, you can literally be like, oh, I don't know what that answer is. Can you actually explain it to me? I think that's a way to see if they're going to collaborate with you. Maybe they won't in the interview. Maybe they'll be like, oh, sorry, I can't answer that right now. But let's keep going, which is fine. But at least you're showing that you're like interested in learning what these things are. Because it's like an important thing as a developer. You constantly have to be learning. So the idea that you're not going to ask questions to maybe the person who's going to be managing you is probably not a great idea, right?
Yeah. It's funny. I've never been asked a question on Django test, by the way, or testing in general, what you just referenced. So
yeah,
that's never came up. And I think I got like 15 offers in that process.
Sure.
So it's kind of interesting there, but I see your point and the value there, and I absolutely agree with you. I loved your explanation on the response. I'll give you a second. Go ahead.
The like a manager that doesn't write code is not going to understand why you need to test or write unit tests, right? Like a lot of people I've ever worked with that aren't software developers, whether it's for a project or whatever, they'll often be like, hey, can you make this thing? Yeah, it's done. Okay, cool. They won't be like, oh, can you show me the unit tests, right? Or can you run the automated tests for me? They won't do that. Some of the best ones definitely will, because they know the need for test-driven development, or at least having unit tests if you aren't doing test-driven development. So that's like one of those things where, yeah, maybe your first few interviewers won't do that. But if you start actually communicating with a senior developer, they're definitely going to hammer you on those things, because they know that the previous interviewer probably didn't ask you those questions.
Yeah, great point. I liked your response too. I try to hit that one too. Like I think it was just before the stream, we were talking about the college style assessment where you study for a week and try to get this test complete. And then once the test is done, you may remember some of those things and you don't. And that's what I try to stay away from in the interview, because I can care less what you remembered the week before this interview. I really want to see your thought process, and your response here is like the best thing when it comes to not knowing an answer. Let's say you're not clear on it, like ask right there. Don't just say, well, I don't know that. Like, can I, just go ahead and elaborate on that, explain maybe what you think it is, and ask more questions, because you're going to be in an environment where you're asking questions and learning constantly. So that's good. Thanks for that donation, by the way, Praveen. I appreciate that. Just saw that donation come in. So I want to go into the next one. So database relationships. So just understanding, obviously, the model structure, database design, dealing with that. That's going to be a big topic here. You're dealing with the database architecture, and obviously in making queries to that database, filtering, and so on. That was probably the biggest focus as far as like the technical questions that I've experienced. Yeah, was setting up examples with that, making queries, and obviously relationships between the models there.
Yeah, I mean, asking a question of like, when would you use a NoSQL database in Django? that's probably a good question to try and understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with Django and what Django is really good for. So if I said, tell me about how to integrate Django and MongoDB, and you're like, oh, well, that's simple. You just change the database settings and then you're good. Well, that might work with certain packages, but the problem is the underlying structure of what Django is for. So you'd really want to go back and challenge the notion. I think this should happen in interviews, is challenge the notion of, do we even need that technology for Django, right? Or is this really about Django, or is it about something else? So having enough skill to know that, and I think this goes to like teaching to the test, right? Or learning to the test. It is like, if you're just learning to regurgitate answers on definitions, you might not have a really solid understanding as to why Django wasn't built for NoSQL databases by its sheer design. I mean, it's like from the get-go is made for SQL databases. So if you don't know like contextually why you would not use a NoSQL database, or when you would, then it's going to be really challenging to like answer like what database would be best for X, Y, or Z, right? Like for this project, what would be the best database that we should use for this? And then going a little bit further with that is also for front end things, right? So like, what's the best front end framework for Django? Like, I think I get this question a lot anyway from students, because it's something that is really hot right now, of like front end frameworks, the full stack. So that is another question that I think people should spend some time thinking about, on what is a front end framework and what is a back end framework, and where does Django fit into all of those things.
Yeah, you're in that sense, when you're asking that question, you're getting the overall understanding of what the value is in each and what they are. They're getting, yeah.
I like, well, both questions about your database and front end frameworks are about, where does Django fit into the equation, right? So maybe that's the question. Maybe that's where, maybe you get deep into the database technology for sure. But then maybe the bigger question for beginner, to like separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, the beginner is like, where does Django fit into the equation of software development in general? I think that like being able to answer that in an articulate way, which maybe I'm not being that articulate right now, but is probably a good idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think you actually said that perfectly. That's if a lot of people are asking that question, when do we use React? Why should I use React? If I'm dealing with somebody who doesn't understand that, if I'm hiring now, it depends on the position. Like if I'm just trying to get you to plug and play in one specific area, I might be less concerned about that. But if you're not sure what place that takes in this entire ecosystem, then that's a kind of a red flag that maybe you're a little bit newer, that you don't have the best understanding of what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you kind of you opened up a whole different path here, and I like where you're going with this. So I want to create Justin's rules for getting hired at Coding for Entrepreneurs here, let's say. So the first one, I actually wrote these down. It's DRY. For those of you guys that don't know that stands for don't repeat yourself. So Justin wants to know that you understand that concept, and that means you're not rewriting code. If you have anything to add to that, you're not rewriting code. You're being efficient. You're trying to write good and clean code. So if you don't understand DRY, that's a big concept. You're not going to get hired at Coding for Entrepreneurs. If you don't know unit tests, that's pretty important to you, how to write tests and go through that process.
But about tests, it like many people believe in writing tests before anything else, right? So that's test-driven development. And so to think that you are opening up test.py and you are writing out the tests before you write views, before you write models, that's what you start with. It's like so unintuitive to me, because that's not how I started at all. But that is test-driven development. And to think that that's like a whole ecosystem. And some people are like, I will never hire a developer that doesn't do test-driven development. Like, that's like, whoa. Like both you and I write tests after the fact. I like building the thing out, then thinking through all the logic and then verifying that logic. which is not necessarily something I would be hired for to run a team at Google. Well, Google's probably definitely doing test-driven development. So I think that's like an important part of tests and this concept of like spending time there. But one thing that did come to mind before all of this, before the technical things, something we didn't really talk about is like the soft skills. Is like, how do you present yourself? Like, are you, even if it's an interview like this, are you wearing a suit like you're meeting up in person? Are you clean shaven? Are you not wearing a hat? You know, like these sorts of things are definitely important, whether or not you're in person, right? But also, like, how do you introduce yourself? Are you looking at the camera? Are you staring down? Camera or their eyes? Are you staring down? Are you looking off to the side? Are you like picking your nose? You know, things that people don't realize they might be doing, especially when they're remote, definitely do, right? So I think
soft skills in there.
I think that's like, if you can't talk to non-technical people, or you have a really hard time with it, like it's going to be extra challenging for you to get over the barrier of working on a team that's cross-functional, right? A marketing guy might come over to you and be like, "Hey, Dennis, do you know how to do this?" "Yeah, sure, I can do that." While you're I don't know, the engineer, the mechanical engineer comes over and goes like, "Hey, what do you think about doing a modeling software for this thing?" Like, if you can't talk to those two guys or two girls, like what's going to happen? You know what I mean? Like, things fall apart. But a lot of interviewers get those things from the beginning. Like, if the recruiter, somebody who's not necessarily that technical, can't really have a conversation with you, you're not going to move much further. It doesn't matter how technical you are, unless you're going to be a cog in a giant team. That might be a different story. But if you can't actually have these conversations, those soft skills are incredibly important. We could talk for a long, long time about soft skills, because it's like,
I feel like that's missed in tech. That always surprises me how disconnected people are, how little, I guess they don't think that that's gonna be a big part of the interview. Like, that was the first thing for me. I'm looking for, like, my personal assessment before anything outside of looking at projects and all that. It was soft skills, and I loved people that ask questions. Like, I love seeing somebody that was more curious than me, more curious or as curious. Like, if I'm interviewing you and you don't know the answer to that, like, picking up on it and just asking more questions and trying to dissect what I just asked them, that tells me that they're probably going to go home and study that. And I've had people like that, where they'll, like, right after the interview, "Hey, I know I missed this. I couldn't answer that, but I just looked it up, and this is how I feel about this. This is what I think here."
Yeah.
So we have a soft skills, dry test, and you talked about the overall concept of development. What's something that, let's say specifically for Django, what's something that somebody needs to understand, or a topic they need to be able to cover decently well to get hired with you? What's another thing that's like a big red flag?
Or writing efficient queries and query sets, which is challenging. It can be really challenging. So even if you don't write them, let's say, for instance, I give you one that's super inefficient, I would ask you why it's inefficient, and then how would I go about trying to improve it. That alone is like a pretty challenging undertaking, I think. I mean, or it can be. It could also be incredibly easy, but to do it well is not a small feat. To do efficient queries.
I know for me, I want to add to that then. For me, it bothered me when I saw people writing inefficient code in general, like when you're not using things that are already built in for you. I interviewed somebody and they gave me a demo project one time, and they would end up writing. I actually hired this person actually at one point, even though we had to look past that. But he would write all his forms manually. Like, he wouldn't use model forms. He would write them all out manually. And then, like, if he wanted to add in like an extra field, like an extra attribute to like a certain post request, he would always add it as a hidden field. And that bothered the crap out of me. I'm like, why are you adding in hidden fields into HTML or into your HTML code when that can be sent in on the request? There's different ways to add that. So to me, it bothered me that even though I gave him the solutions, it was almost, I had to retrain him, where he didn't see the better version of that, because he was comfortable with writing in, and when I'm saying hidden fields for somebody that might not understand that, that's like if we're adding in a form, let's say we're trying to get user information, and a hidden field would be like, is this user an admin or not, right? Let's say you just want to by default set that. He would put in is admin as an option into the form and then add it as a hidden field, and that would be sent on the post request. That's like one specific example, but I just felt like it wasn't efficient, but he didn't want to adjust from that. He wasn't willing to do that because he's done that for years prior.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Like little things like that. Like, are you willing to adjust would be a big one for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree. How do you, without asking that question, because asking someone if they're willing to adjust this, they're going to say, yes, of course. Right. But like, I mean, I have a story about that if you want to get into it, but there's one thing to ask them that directly, or if you're a really good interviewer, you're going to try and press them on that solution, right? So they show you some code, or you show them some code and you'd be like, what's wrong with this? And if they go nothing, and there's clearly something wrong with it, it's a red flag. But then you could even point them in direction. You could be like, oh, well, what do you think about this hard-coded form data? Like, why is this here? Why would this be efficient, or why would this be inefficient?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what are use cases? What are times that it actually makes sense to hard code this, and what are times that it doesn't? Because it's really hard to always make that blanket statement.
Yeah, you're right. Because it could be efficient sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, or they have some other really solid reason to write all of the fields in HTML and just validate the data in Django, or perhaps they don't even know about form validation, and that's why they're writing it, in the actual HTML itself, which would be another topic for a question,
Yeah, I like your way of analyzing that though. You don't have to necessarily look at it and say what's wrong with this code, because that almost feels like a trick question. Like if you show me code and tell me what's wrong with it, now I'm almost hesitant. Like, okay, am I missing something? Is the answer no, there's nothing wrong with it? Like I feel like I'm being set up if you ask me that question. But if you said, hey, yeah, exactly. You could be testing me. But if you put it in a way where it's like, it's not my personal preference to do what you did here, but maybe, or is there a different option? And I want to know if they at least know about the other option. That way I know I can tell you, A, do they know about the other option? B, why didn't you choose that other option? So I can maybe press that a little bit further, but almost go slowly there. If you hired somebody, obviously that's probably a little bit too late unless you're hiring them as like an intern or on a temporary basis. The best way to test that is not to ask somebody, are you willing to adjust? Because everybody's going to say yes. The one thing that everyone always says in the interview is I'm willing to learn. I'm a hard worker. Yeah. Everyone's going to say that. You're not going to sit here and tell me you're a lazy worker.
No.
So what I would like to do is I really pay attention to how people take notes. Like for me, if anytime I've worked for somebody, I was all ears. If you told me something, I won't do anything without writing it down. Like it bothers me when people don't write it down, because if you're not writing it down, or at least like acknowledging the fact that I'm telling you something, you're going to forget it. Like you ever go to a restaurant, a waiter's not writing down your order, and you're just like, there's no way you're going to remember this. And then they end up forgetting it, and you're just annoyed because they could have just written that down. So my point with that is if I say it, I almost won't even acknowledge it, and I'll let them continue writing their code. And if I see the adjustment in their code, it means they're listening. So I can see that adjustment right away. But if I say it, I won't even force them to do it. I'll just see how they respond to it. And if they continue writing it the same way, I might address it a few more times, but that's a pretty big red flag. Unfortunately, a little bit too late because they're already working. But yeah, in that process, I would check it.
Yeah. I mean, another question that would be probably posed, or should be posed, I would imagine, but it's fruitful to have this exercise in your mind anyway, is what's something that you care deeply about that people would say you are crazy or wrong? Most people would say that. That would be a question I would pose. Another one.
Can you rephrase that? I want to hear that again. What's something that you're crazy about?
What's something that you are sure about that other people might think you're crazy for? Right.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, or the vast majority of people don't believe that. So it could be something as simple as, I personally think that we will have AI, like actual AI software that will work alongside of us, almost like a coach that will make us better from the get-go, right? With all sorts of areas of expertise. It's not going to replace us. It's going to make us better. So this is where I think most people on this stream would probably feel like, yeah, that makes sense. but there's a lot of people that are afraid that it's just going to take their jobs, and they're not going to be able to do that. Truck drivers would be a good example of this. Self-driving cars are coming. Truck drivers are probably a little nervous that they're going to be replaced. More than likely, what's going to happen is the AI is going to work right next to them for the foreseeable future. Maybe not for everyone, but anyway. So that question is about how can you think through that one? Another one that would kind of follow up that question is, I just mentioned self-driving cars. It's like, oh, well, clearly you think about self-driving cars a lot. Can you describe a software architecture to manage a fleet of self-driving cars, right? So if you're thinking about something a lot, it's useful, or at least fruitful, to think through how you would actually accomplish this with code, right? So in my case, of self-driving cars, your case, it'd be many, many other things, right? So that's another part of this, of like how it kind of leads into that. It doesn't necessarily have to be something so dramatic of like nobody else believes this, but maybe something that you're focusing on a lot and you spend a lot of time thinking about. How do you extrapolate that into things or your actual actions on building real things, you know?
Yeah, I think, I guess in web development, it's not exactly on the same topic, but I always like to ask people, not just what side projects are they working on, but what's their ideal project? What's something that in the future they would like to build? In this case, because it's web development, like, I don't think you can really be maybe you can, but I don't think you can be a web developer without having some kind of like fantasy project that you want to build. Even if you just want to go get hired at some company and just love your job and work 9 to 5, I think everybody still fantasizes about building that next big thing, even if they're not actually actively pursuing it or have no intention of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a good way to gauge someone's level of interest in code, because when you're asking, when somebody can answer that question good, that tells me a lot more than somebody where a lot of people ask what programming language is better and that kind of stuff. I really don't like those questions, but that tells me somebody's just trying to get into it because they want the job. They're not that passionate about it. Like Ed from DevEd put out this video, and he was addressing that programming language, and he said it really cool. He's like, or he explained it very well. He's like, when I was starting, I had my dreams of accomplishing something, and then I just had to figure out what would work to make it, what I needed to learn to make it work. So programming is just a tool. It's this argument of which is better that is it takes you into such a different area that when you're trying to accomplish a task, you'll find the best ones for your solution. And that tells me that you're a programmer because you're a problem solver. Justin, I'm seeing that we're on 32 minutes. How are you on time?
We're okay right now. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Don't worry, or don't hesitate to let me know for passing. I want to make sure to respect your time there.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
But yeah, I liked your elaboration on that. Like, you're able to get into somebody's passions without telling me, people will write on their bio, I am a passionate developer. It's also something that everyone's going to write. So it doesn't really tell me if you're really passionate.
Totally.
Yeah.
So another question that's kind of a silly one, but what would you work really hard to be lazy for? Like, what I've undertaken projects that have taken me weeks so I can save like an hour, so tell me about one of those. That's like another thing that I think is a fruitful exercise along the same lines of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I noticed there's a couple things related to Django that has come up a couple times. So Django sessions, does that come up ever? Absolutely. It 100% does. What are sessions? How do you use them? Can you store a bunch of data in sessions? Django signals. What are the positives and negatives of Django signals?
Sorry, you can go ahead. I just thought you were complete with that.
No, go ahead.
How about middleware too? So sessions, signals, middleware.
Yeah, what is middleware? Why do you need it? And can you make a custom middleware right now?
Yeah.
Next one, the server configurations. Yeah, you probably need to know what they are and what they're for, and like, what is GUnicorn and why would you use GUnicorn with Django? What is white noise? This goes with the static file stuff and static file serving. I'm literally going off of Krunal's question here. Thanks, Krunal. That's a good one. Those aren't exactly advanced concepts, right? So those are pretty straightforward. We already talked about unit tests a lot. Those are like fundamental to running a Django project. Even if you don't know everything about how sessions work, you should have a general idea of what sessions do. Same with all the things I just mentioned. But white noise would be, I would pose a question of, do you need white noise and why? And if you're like, I don't know what white noise is, that's okay. I think that's a perfectly okay thing to not know. But you would need to know what Django static files are and how to serve them.
Yeah. I think it depends on what I'm looking for. Like all those things that you mentioned, those are all things that could be like, for a beginner, they might not be able to explain to you in detail of what exactly is going on. And I would personally prefer somebody that does know all those things that you mentioned. Like, this is what this is how sessions are, or what they are, how they work. But then there's also the person that maybe studied for 3 months. Like in my case, I studied enough, and that's where I have like an interesting background. And I've actually been cleaning that up right now to become more technically well-versed. I have a lot of gaps in my knowledge, but I was still more than ready to work in positions that where I can be, if I'm plugged in, I can be effective, and maybe a senior developer can assist me here.
Yeah.
But yeah, like details, like sessions, like I can use them, I can work with him, I can tell you what they are. But if you start going into exactly how they function, that's where I feel like people in interviews, again, if you're, I guess, in a senior developer position, you should know that, but they feel like they're going to freeze up because they can't give the best answer. They really start stressing out there because they don't know exactly what that is, or what white noise is, exactly how it functions.
Yeah. I would also ask how to describe the steps of getting Django into production. Like, let's see it. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just tell me those right now. What are the packages? Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just adding, can you put a project together? Can you publish it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Production.
What are the packages necessary for production, aside from Django, or is Django enough? What is version control? And please describe the most popular ways to do version control. Like, version control is not Django specific, of course, but you need to kind of know what that answer is. But again, like, if you don't get to all of these questions, if there's not this huge depth of questions, I think it might speak to a couple things. Number one, you answered other questions really well. Number two, the interviewer isn't that technical. They have a few speaking points. Or number three, the interviewer asked you a really hard question already, and they got a great answer from you. And so they're moving on, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't try to answer a lot of these questions yourself, and spend the time thinking about it, because just because you can fool a couple people doesn't mean that when you get on the job, even with fooling the interview process, when you get on the job, you still need to be able to be the best possible developer you can be. So I think that's like a key thing with interviewing, is like, it's like a date, right? You're chatting with somebody, and if you impress them, great, you keep going. But if you're putting on this like show for the date, eventually your true personality and your true knowledge are going to come out. So I think being upfront about that in interviews, or partnership relationships, like if you're going to be working with someone on starting a business or something like that, just being very upfront about what you know and what you don't know, and not putting on this like show, because I think we over work for interviews and under prepare for our actual skills, right? So at the end of the day, you want to have those actual skills. So if you fall apart a little bit on certain areas of Django that somebody like myself might think is really important, you can, again, ask those questions, but take that as, oh, I really need to study this. I get those questions a lot, right? So I do live Q&As fairly often on my channel, and I get questions that I'm just stumped about. And, you know, these really good Django developers, I'm like getting there, but these really good Django developers know these things like the back of their hand, and really go like, what the heck? How is this guy teaching people? I wouldn't even hire this guy because he doesn't know this answer. And I feel that myself, but I'm after the knowledge, I'm after the skill. So I would take an interview as a great place to just challenge the skills that you already have, to see if you can improve them, not just to land a job, because a job's a job. It's not going to, I mean, it might help you in the short run, but in the long run, you really want to be gleaning new skills from that job. So if the interview is incredibly easy, I would think long and hard about, is this really somewhere I want to work? Because maybe I'm not going to be pushed here. Maybe I'm actually inside of my comfort zone. and therefore the interview is worthless because I'm not going to be pushing myself,
Yeah. So I took the LinkedIn assessment test.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny. Like, it's really cool to go through that and actually see what you might be missing, maybe what terminology you might get into, or you should probably clean up on.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because a lot of the questions were like, okay, if I actually, sometimes, like I said, I feel like they're not created by a real Django developer or Python, whatever assessment test you're making. I feel like they just Googled certain questions up and are giving you like the Wikipedia definition to it. That was one of my issues with it, was the fact that the questions were so technical. And at the same time, I guess it depends on what position you're interviewing for. But if I took that test 2 years ago, I was building out a real project, maybe not at the best level, but I was doing real work, built a product out that was making real money. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have passed that test. I probably would have gotten like 30-40% on that just because of the terminology. But it was still good to see it, to understand maybe where my weaknesses are. But it didn't mean that I couldn't develop it. Like I put out a tweet about that, and I kind of mentioned that assessment test. It doesn't mean that you need to go through all these interview questions and absolutely master them. Like, you can still apply, you can still build that project.
Yep. Yeah, I also think it's really important to publish a lot of work on GitHub. Like, that should come up in interviews. Like, what's your GitHub? What's your best project that you've done? What's something that you're really proud of? And having your work shown, because that can also answer a lot of questions that assessments might not. But I think to your point, doing more assessments, if you're really unsure of everything, you're probably not ready. And you should probably take a lot of assessments to see if you actually are ready, or pick up some books. 2 Scoops of Django from Danny Greenfield, or I think he changed his name to Fieldroy. That's a great book. If you just go through the table of contents and be like, do I know this concept well enough to speak on it? I mean, if you read that book, there's going to be a lot of no's, for me included. And so you would want to actually at least study what that concept is, so you can speak on it for a little bit. Or you're reading about it, because that's the other thing. It's like, oh, what are you reading right now? What are you learning from? What's the most recent thing you learned about Django? The most recent thing that was like mind blowing for me was doing a single page Django application, similar to like a Flask application, in one module. Adam Johnson wrote this article on it, and I made a video about it. But like, that was like, I didn't ever think you would use Django in that way. Well, obviously you can do it. Like, it's all Python, right? But I never thought of actually applying that until I read about it. And so that's another thing that just opens up for a discussion on soft skills as well as your actual technical skills, because now you're talking about things that aren't necessarily going to be everyone's experience, right? It's going to be more specific to your experience.
Yeah. So what kind of questions? What kind of questions would you ask regarding DRF, the Django REST framework? I'm assuming, let's say this is a junior position. I would expect you to know it for sure, especially in like the site architecture where we're using React in the front end. So building out the APIs, what kind of questions would you think it would be good to test somebody there? Maybe like, first of all, why is it useful? What is it? And so on. So maybe take on that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question I would start off with is, why is the Django REST framework needed? And people could say, no, it's not needed, because it's not. You can absolutely make something without the Django REST framework. Django has a lot of thanks. Django has a lot of built-in support for not using the Django REST framework. However, it's so much easier to use. Just like using class-based views is, in the long run, better and easier to use than function-based views. But if you don't know them like the back of your hand, maybe not even that much. If you don't know them really, like if you don't know how to do mix-ins, you don't know how to do that stuff, Django REST framework is going to look like a foreign language to you. It's going to look like a completely different thing for Django, assuming you're using their class-based views. You can use their generic view sets, which I actually don't recommend. That's like a shortcut to doing something that you don't fully know how the Django REST framework works. So I would actually go back further and say, how do you accomplish everything in the Django REST framework manually? Like, how do you do authentication with just Django and not like authentication headers for something like a React application? How do you do that manually without the Django REST framework? And then how do you do it in the Django REST framework? If you can answer those things, I think you'd be well suited for a number of backend jobs.
So the reason why I liked your answer in saying you don't need it, because that throws some people off. Some people get so into one topic. Like, that tells me you understand the value of it. If you can tell me you don't need it, like I'll ask you why. Like, okay, cool. Where does it come in handy? But if you're telling me you don't need it, it means you understand the power of what it is and maybe when it's used. So it's kind of I love stuff like that. I love absolutes. Like somebody commented, speaking of view sets and routers. So I created a tutorial with Brad Traversy, and it's on Udemy, actually, my first Udemy course. And I used the Django REST framework, but I didn't use view sets and routers. And somebody purchased the course and left me this bad review because I'm not using view sets and routers. And he said something along the lines of like, why even use the Django REST framework if you're not utilizing view sets and routers? And that kind of cracked me up because he left me a bad review and then stated something that was completely wrong. That was the Django REST framework is useless without view sets and routers. So he was wrong, and then kind of went off on a little tangent there. And it's like, it was you're using the advantages of what they are, just like class-based views and function-based views, but it's
that's I think we fall into these camps, right? So we fall into these camps of like things that I really love, and so therefore this is how it should be done. Mm-hmm. Before Django REST framework came out, there's another REST API package that I love, just called Tasty Pie. It's gone, right? So if you really know how things work, also Dennis, don't read reviews. It doesn't do anything for you. Listen to questions. That's what you should be doing, not the reviews. But if you understand how it's done, then if Django blows up, you can use whatever replaces it, right? And that's true if you have to move to JavaScript, if you have to move to Ruby on Rails or whatever. Understanding what Django and Django REST framework do is more important than those things themselves, right? Which is why I said you don't need it, because it's basically just a way to serialize data and return, and then also unpack serialized data. So that's not like unique to Django. And it's not unique to Django REST framework. That's something all web applications have to do. And part of the reason why a lot of people are leaving doing backend development in general is because there are services that handle the API of things, right? So that would be another question. It's like what would you not use Django for? We already talked about that, but like specifically, when would you definitely not use Django? Or what are some alternatives to Django that you know about? And if you don't know about some, then I would look into that. I think it'd be worth having a discussion about it, because like the Django REST framework is geared towards solving, connecting your Django project to a RESTful API service, or to making it a RESTful API service, so you have endpoints that can share data with other applications. Like that's incredibly common, and you can use a lot of API services for that. You can use serverless functions for it. What the heck is a serverless function, right? So this is where broadening your scope from not just Django will end up helping you understand more than where Django fits into the big equation. But it's hard. That starts to get a lot more advanced, and it's not easy to know exactly when to do what. But it is good to at least be able to have that conversation with somebody who's incredibly technical, so they can press you on, oh, well, you think view sets are the greatest. Why? Why are view sets so nice? Why do you use them? What about mixins? What about object permissions? Like, what about these things that maybe view sets fall short on? Or where do view sets fall short on? I don't, you know what I mean? Like, so there's all these other questions that you can start coming up with. And I think if you were interviewed by the person who gave you that rating, you would then have to pose those questions to them, right? Like, I think that's perfectly valid for an interviewee to pose those questions to somebody who's very dogmatic about an approach. And because that might not be somebody you want to work with. So sorry, I went on a little tangent there.
No, that was good. You explained that perfectly. You gave the good examples there too. Somebody asked, by the way, what was that book that you recommended? You said it was 2 Scoops Django. Is that correct?
2 Scoops of Django.
2 Scoops of Django.
pretty much any version all the way back to 1.5. So if you want to like, there's like little bits about Django that have changed for sure. And there's the newer versions of the books are refined. Definitely they're iterations, like just like software. So the oldest one will probably teach the average Django developer a lot. Two Scoops of Django, I think it's even 1.4, maybe even 1.3, by Denny Greenfield, and then he changed it to Denny
Roy Greenfield.
Denny, Roy Field or
something like that.
Yeah. I'm going blank. Sorry, Danny, if you're watching. So that's a great book. I really do recommend that you go through that one. I mean, granted, I have a ton of courses that cover a lot of these things as well. But for quick reference, for something to get prepared for, an interview, is going through that book, going through Adam Johnson's blog. Jacob Kaplan-Moss just released a interview type thing for Django. I think just interviews in general, but Jacob Kaplan-Moss is a very prominent figure in the Django development community. He has another blog that I think is really good, worth reading. So yeah, those are a few recommendations I have in getting prepared for an interview. But the best way you can prepare is by doing things, like actually building projects that you care about over and over again. And if it's somebody that you know that you're really close to, that they care about, you can build the projects with them as well. So.
Yeah. So to close off the API or the DRF topic, serializers was probably the biggest conversation. Serializers and authentication, but serializers, we need to know what's going on there, even though it's not specific to Django. But if you're working with that, I'd like to know how it's done, what you're, What
do you need a serializer for? What does it do? Which I guess is the same question, but serializers are a really nice feature of the Django REST framework, but they're not the only thing. Like there's a lot of other things that you can use the Django REST framework for. And then the other question would be, when do you use the Django REST framework? When do you use Fast API or Flask or some other smaller micro framework? Because you should know about those at least a little bit as well. Django's the hardest one of the Python web frameworks. So if you know Django, picking up Fast API or Flask is not really that challenging to do.
Yeah. So to close out the interview conversations, you just said that perfectly when you talked about projects. You mentioned it earlier, and I said that in my video too, where if you're going down this list of questions, like when I was interviewing people, there was like this 50 questions or something like that. When you answer certain questions in a certain way, I might not have to ask you other questions. If you're expanding upon them, if you're kind of validating what my next question might even want to know about you, or what I'm trying to get to know about you. So by answering those, you're elaborating, so that way the interviewer might be able to cross those off. But then you just mentioned projects too. That's one of the biggest forms of validation. The technical questions, like the only reason I would go into the technical questions as far as like what is Django, how to use it, might be either to just confirm something, or maybe you're somebody that your projects didn't really say too much about you and I just wanted to verify it. But if I'm looking at your projects and you just have a boatload of awesome projects, I want to spend more time talking about those, and those projects will usually verify it. I want to know how you built them. I'll ask you questions on specific tools you use, why you used them. But I think that's why that's so important, because that's going to be one of the best steps in that interview process and your chance to really shine, I guess. Because if you're afraid of the technical questions, let's say you freeze up. I know certain people freeze up during tests. They just get this it's like stage fright. Like once they're, they put pen to paper or they're being asked the questions, they panic. So if you're afraid of that, make your portfolio better than ever. Like make sure you have great projects so you can spend time talking about that. So you're not stuck on those technical questions, or if you don't answer them correctly, you're able to, there's forgiveness, I guess, there, because they understand, okay, maybe you might just have stage fright, and that's understandable. You're not going to be in that kind of conversation every day of your life at that job. So yeah, I just wanted to close that out there. And that's it for the questions. If I notice something in the comment section, I didn't want to go too much Q&A here. Justin doesn't have that much time here, but Clubhouse, Justin, are you on it?
I am on Clubhouse, yes. But
I got to find you.
I haven't been using it that much. I think like it's interesting for sure, because you have a lot of people doing conversations like this. And like, I think Elon Musk and the founder of Robinhood had a conversation the other day, and it's like, well, that's pretty cool. You can listen in on their conversations about all sorts of things. So it's definitely fascinating. But for whatever reason, it's like most of those really good conversations are happening at like 6 p.m. to like 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so I miss out on a lot of them because that's when I do family time. So
I'm fascinated by it. So I'm going to find you. I'm usually one of the people that's not an early adopter to stuff like this. I'm not jumping in on the next social platform. But when I heard the concept of it, for those of you guys that don't know it, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning this, because I want to potentially have these conversations on Clubhouse. Imagine what Justin and I are doing. Imagine a social platform for podcasting. Justin and I can start this out on Clubhouse. We all have a profile. It's a voice to talk platform. I can open up a room, like a chat room. You guys are in the comment section. We're here talking. We're on stage. So you can set that up on Clubhouse. But if any of you guys want to interact with us, you guys can, first of all, jump into the room like you're here and listen, but you can raise your hand and we can actually click on your profile. So let's say I pull up a question here. So somebody just says, hey guys, I just joined. Let's say you want to ask a question. Instead of just responding to you, you raise your hand, we click on you. Now you are activated in the voice chat. So the reason why I mention that here is because I actually want to see if maybe I can stream that. I'm not sure how that works because I know in theory you're not supposed to record Clubhouse. But maybe we can stream a conversation. We can do that on Clubhouse, but then just post it here. So we'd be talking through our phones or however that works. And if one of the audience members wants to interact with us, I think that'd be pretty cool. What do you think, Justin? Like to actually hear the question, I think that'd be sweet. Like almost like a radio show.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges is the scale. Like, I mean, how many people are on there? But the coolest thing about it is that we don't have to put our lights on. We don't have to get all set up for
put your makeup on.
Do you do that? Yeah. So like, I think there's a lot of stakes for that. I mean, it's basically a big conference calling app. Right?
I probably can't see it. So that's Justin's profile. Sorry, Justin. Somewhere there.
Yeah. It's just at Justin Mitchell with 1 L. And so I think it's interesting. Maybe it'll come, maybe it won't. One of the things that is like not my favorite about it is that it is ephemeral. It's not something like YouTube where this conversation is going to be recorded and people can hear this for a long time. So yeah, the conference calling nature of it is like, I don't know. I don't love sitting on calls myself. It's kind of the thing, you know? So like a podcast, a lot of podcasts, even if they're interviews like what we're doing here, at the very least, it's not like all cumbersome and people are sort of prepared. A conference call is like, oh, we're just going to talk for a while and maybe it's good, maybe it's not. So it kind of feels like part of the conference call challenge or problems that I see in corporate America, where it's like you have to join this meeting, you have to be on the call, and you have to be on there for a long time. Sure, maybe they're really fascinating people talking, but you can't like rewind or repeat what they said. Like Naval Ravikant says all these really cool, interesting things, but you can't really hear it again. You know, you can't rewind and be like, wait, what did he say? Oh, I missed something. My kid was yelling at me. Like that's where I'm like really kind of hesitant on that as a platform. And also obviously a lot of other people are going to copy it like Twitter. And
of course, yeah.
And
Facebook's going to try to do something.
Going to copy. Yeah. But I don't know. It's interesting.
I feel like that's a feature they'll probably add to it. I mean, as far as the conference call like feel, that's up to you to structure that. Like if I got on it, I get that it's a little bit more laid back, but I would still want to have a point like we're discussing right now. Like there's nothing different from this in Clubhouse other than the fact that you can't see our faces. But if we do want to record it, it'd be nice for Clubhouse to have that feature. But this way I can, in theory, I think I'm allowed to record the conversation so we can still maybe even have our faces, if not whatever, but we can post it on YouTube or on a podcasting platform after the fact.
I don't see why you couldn't just record, just open up an iPad or something and record on there. Yeah. I don't see why you couldn't do that.
So that I think that should be a feature they probably should add later down the road, but I don't see any reason why they can't do it. And remember, they're trying to scale. It's invite only right now. So I'm sure they'll be adding certain things there. One
of the things I'm really happy about with Clubhouse is the fact that it's just like sort of taking over, right? Like it shows us that there's still room for the next really good idea. And I think there's a lot of people that just absolutely love this idea of being able to get on this like call type environment. And it's like new and fresh, but it's also like the people who don't want to set up a camera, don't want to have lights and all that stuff, like, but have a lot of value to glean from. Like, I mean, Elon Musk could pay somebody to do it, but there's people that are fascinating, like Andre Karpathy, who is the head engineer at Tesla, or not the head engineer, but the head artificial intelligence engineer at Tesla. Him jumping on a call, he's probably not going to set up a camera and mic and all this stuff to have a YouTube call. Maybe at some point, maybe now with COVID he does it, but he can jump into a room in Clubhouse and give a lot of really cool, interesting things. And it's really low stakes for these people because for the most part, they're not recorded. And also there's way less involved, but then you can get really cool people talking because they're both on Clubhouse. So I don't know. We'll see where it evolves into, and maybe you and I will have to jump on there a few times.
Yeah, they don't have a desktop version, right? Like we'd have to do that from our phone, and then probably.
Yeah, I think there's an iPad version, so you could probably record it from the iPad. I mean, and also with your phone, if you have a Mac and an iPhone, you can open up Xcode. Actually, I think even like Camtasia, you can record what's going on your phone into the desktop application. So that's another option for it. So I think there's definitely a way to record them. People have been doing it. I've seen that.
We'll have to do it because I really want to interact like where they do it on a radio show where somebody can call in like that. How much cooler is that to actually hear the question? Now, you might still want to screen it because it'd be kind of frustrating to get the same old questions, but maybe they can like send in, like submit a form and then have somebody screening the questions for you. So you know exactly what the question is at least, or the topic.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but that's like, but do you really want to spend the time building screeners? And so I don't know, like if you get a spam call, you just take them off. Actually, StreamYard, you can have other like guests actually come up on the show too. So you can actually accomplish very similar things inside of StreamYard too. You would just have to send them
an email.
Link. Yeah, that little share thing on the bottom.
You're right. Maybe we can try that. But then they have to have a camera, right? They have to set that up.
They just have to have a mic. They don't need to show their face. You know,
who wants to be on the show sometime in the future? Maybe not today. Yeah. Thanks for jumping on, by the way, Justin. We're trying to schedule this week. I'm moving in a few hours actually, so I'm right after this stream. I'm packing up my computer and we are driving across country. So
what's in Florida? Why are you moving there?
I'm just tired of Washington State.
Okay.
It's my wife wants to live on the beach, so we have a house 2-minute walk to the beach.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Where in Florida? In Miami?
Destin. So it's like on the Gulf. So actually so from where we're at, it's a 3-hour or 2-hour difference. So Florida's usually in the Eastern time zone, but we're in the, is it SET? Which one was that? It's 2-hour difference. So it's like right by Panama City, like half an hour away from it.
Okay, cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with the move. Are you driving or flying or what are you doing?
We're driving. We pretty much sold everything off. We're selling our house. Well, that's already taken care of. So we're here the last day. We're taking our clothes. We've sold pretty much all the stuff here. So we're doing a 1 car, and then somebody is going to come by. My father-in-law will drive with the truck just to bring final stuff. So we got a condo on the beach. You have to come by sometime. I know you're in San Diego, but hey, it's a little bit different as far as the water here. And I know you're not too fond of Florida, just like Mitch.
I was just giving you a hard time. I think there's a lot of good and bad things about all states in the U.S. Florida has some really cool things about it. I have had fun in Miami and Orlando. So it's not like there's a lot of good things about Florida, but you hear on the news and stuff like that, you hear a lot of not so great things about Florida. And also like Family Guy makes fun of Florida all the time too, which is pretty good. But I'm actually not quite to San Diego. I'm still an hour and a half north.
Oh, that's right. Never mind. You're like more LA, right? Yeah, Newport.
Yeah. I'm in between LA and San Diego, but closer to LA. I think the thing is like you have this sense of like, oh, Florida's going to be great. The coolest thing is no matter what your situation is, you can always up and move, right? Or at least plan to do that. So if
I'm not tied down,
yeah. I mean, even if like I have kids, I don't feel like we can't do stuff like that too, So
Well, that's what I meant to why, like work wise, like there's nothing. We were asking, we were getting our condo, and the lady asked if I was military because there's one of the world's biggest military bases there, Air Force Base, and so it's either Air Force, then you have tourism and fishing. Those are like the three industries. So she thought it was cool that we're there. As you know, I'm 26 years old or 27. God, I forget how old I am. That means I'm getting old.
Or the opposite, because when you're old, you like remember.
Yeah, or that. But yeah, I was like, okay, like, or she was like fascinated by the fact that we're this age and able to just get a place that has no jobs in theory. So we'll see. It'll be good. We're driving through Vegas actually, so we'll be in Vegas for 2 days. Okay, we have some family there, so I'm taking that trip again. I like that road trip. Nice.
Yeah. Where in Washington State are you again?
So right next to Portland, Oregon. We're right across the bridge here.
Oh wow. Okay. Are you in wait? What town is it?
Vancouver. So it's like right up I-5. You cross the bridge between the Columbia River here.
Okay.
So it's like Portland, and then just north of it. Like if you were to cross that bridge, it's a 2-minute drive.
Yeah, I have family in. Oh geez, I'm going blank on the city right now for some reason, but it's not far. It's in between Seattle and Portland. Probably not far
Tacoma,
from you.
Probably Kent.
Inland from Tacoma. Actually, I do have family in Tacoma as well, but it's like east of I think it's the 5 freeway, but I'm not positive. Anyway, so I got family up there. Washington, it's probably really cold right now, I would imagine.
It's freezing. It rains. I hate the rain. We get about 3 months of summer here, maybe a little bit less, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
So I snowboard, but I haven't done that for the last like 3 years. I've been way too busy. So I'm like, okay, I can't snowboard. I don't give a crap about hiking. It's not my thing. So I would way rather just live on the beach and work, and then dip in the water for, a couple times a day. Like we went on vacation for 2 weeks last year, and it was the coolest thing. Like I was still able to get plenty of work done. Yeah. And then just take a break, hop in, hop back out, get back to work. It's cool.
Oh so, man, when all the lockdowns are done and stuff, I think you and your wife should go spend some time in like Thailand or Indonesia.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's like your cost of living is really, really low.
Yeah.
And what I almost did those things, but then I got married and had kids. But one of my friends who did those things absolutely loved it. And then there's a really vibrant startup community in I think it was in Bali. So I don't know how it is now. I have no idea if people are still there, if people came back, but that would be another cool thing for you to do.
We went to Greece in 2019, and then for this year we had Russia planned, and we wanted to do like Italy and stuff. I know it's not exactly like Thailand, but my brother went there actually last year too.
I love Italy.
Not 2020, 2019, but yeah. So we're definitely going to do some traveling and take care of that, but we're still going to hit up St. Petersburg, see the old country.
You Russians.
Yep.
do you know the song Rasputin by Boney M?
Yeah.
Is that your jam or no?
No, not exactly.
At the end of it, it's like, oh, you Russians or something.
I prefer the old school Russian music. Like I listen to country music a lot, and I don't like what we have today is not country music anymore. It's just like, I don't know. I called it like pop country. So when it comes to Russian music, the modern stuff, I'm not too big of a fan of it. I prefer the old classic stuff.
I don't think Rasputin by Boney M is considered modern.
No,
it's from the 70s.
Yeah. Well, it's also, it doesn't really fall into that. Like, I don't know. I just don't feel like it's still part of that genre. It's like about it, but it doesn't really, it's not like Russian music really.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Good luck with the move. Thanks for having me on. It was fun. Good chatting with you.
Absolutely. And congrats, Mitch. If you're watching, probably not, but I'll tell him in person or in text here.
And this little baby. Yeah. All right, man. See you later. Take it easy.